This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
What do you guys want to talk about?
Well, this one's obviously going up late. I don't know how redundant it'll be by the time everybody sees it, but I was out of town this week, and I watched all the shows and had my notes prepared. I just didn't have the audio equipment to record anything from where I was staying. So, well, we're here. I'm back in Pittsburgh. A day or two late be darned. That's not going to stop me from letting you all know how horrible Dynamite is. Now, of course, we have other stuff to talk about as well. I'm also trying to make sure I leave enough time to edit this and get it uploaded before the Money in the Bank pay-per-view, because I still have to watch AEW Collision tomorrow and try to get everything together for the show on Monday. There's a lot of stuff to talk about. And I'll just go ahead and let you know now, I'm not going to do a SmackDown report. I'm going to skip over that one since the go-home show to the pay-per-view is already happening tonight. Actually, it would have happened yesterday, but I'm not going to have enough time to sit down and watch it. We already have way too much stuff going on this weekend. So I'm going to take a powder on that one. I'm sure I'll be missing out on a lot of exhilarating television and multiple girls segments that'll just drive me up a wall anyway. But, hey, if something's got to go on the back burner, my go-to is SmackDown, more often than not. Mostly in that it's safe to assume that nothing of substance is usually going to happen on that show anyway, unless it's bloodline related. But we will save that for the Monday discussion, I guess. We have plenty to talk about today. And boy, do I have a thing or two to say about that Dynamite show that happened this week. And, I guess I'll start here. Not that I'm trying to delay the actual report, but I have a funny little story before we get going with the actual program. And by funny, I mean humorous on my end, maybe not so much on AEW's part. Since we already know how I watch this show just for laughs anyway, so I can tear it apart every week, I figured you might get a kick out of this one too. It's not story time with Adam Cole, baby. It's actually better than that. So I mentioned how I was away this week. I was in Louisville, visiting friends and family, and I went down with my dad. We're sharing a hotel room together, and normally, you know, if you've been watching the show for a while, you've heard me talk about my normal routine when it comes to Dynamite. I typically DVR'd on Wednesday because I work late, and then Thursday night will usually be the point where I actually get a chance to sit down and watch the show on delay, which is good for me because it gives me the opportunity to skip over all the crap that I don't want to see, which is like 85% of the show a lot of weeks. But since I wasn't working this week, I said, you know what? It's Wednesday night. We're hanging out in the hotel room right now. It's closing in on 8 o'clock. I'm going to watch this show live. Now, I will warn you ahead of time. My dad has never seen or heard of All Elite Wrestling. But the first thing I told him is, Dad, you've got to watch this show. It is so goddamn bad. And my caveat going in was, this isn't WWE, so you're not going to recognize like 90% of the people on this show. And the only form of wrestling you'll get on this show, if you get a match, is something involving maybe MJF or FTR or CM Punk. He had no idea who I was talking about. Conveniently enough, Punk and FTR were not on the show. And MJF was in 2 backstage pre-tapes with Adam Cole, both of which I think went a combined total of 60 seconds and change, if that. But at least my dad got to see MJF on the show. And shock of all shocks, upon his first 2 viewings of MJF on camera, again, for the combined 2 minutes of TV time he actually got, wouldn't you know it, my dad said that MJF was the best talent on the entire show. Funny how that works. And then for the rest of the show, actually for the rest of the first hour, because he peaced out right after hour 1. But among some of his perspective observations, he asked me very astute questions, such as, and I quote, "Why is that guy bleeding for no reason?" Unquote. I will give you 2 guesses as to who I'm referring to. He asked me, why do they just stand there and chop each other back and forth? A valid question. And I think I finally asked him right before he went to bed, what do you think? And he looked at me deadpan and said, not impressed. Now, obviously, this is a wrestling show that is not geared toward people of his age. He also has a higher IQ level than most people that watch this program every week. Oh, God. I wish he would have stuck around to see that Sting spot at the end of the show. Good fucking God. What an idiot. But hey, at least he knew who Sting was. When they threw that graphic up on screen for his match with Jericho, he recognized him. He actually even recognized Jericho, too. I didn't think he was going to know who he was. But think about that for a minute. Sting and Chris Jericho, the only 2 identifiable names on this entire program for my dad. And of course, they're the former WCW, WWF guys from decades long gone. But I'll tell you, man, it was a joyous occasion. For the first hour of this fiasco, my dad got the full gamut. I'm not kidding you. If I'm looking for the prototypical episode of AEW Dynamite to show a casual fan that has never seen this show and knows nothing about the product, gotta say, this is almost the perfect episode. Perfect in the sense that it had all the recurring problems that we've all come to expect with this program by now. That being that none of it makes a damn lick of sense. Take, for example, the opener. Jon Moxley versus Tomohiro Ishii. The match where... Oh my God. Honestly, it's hard to even describe the expression on my dad's face while watching this. I would say he was dumbfounded, perhaps mesmerized. I don't know, it was almost otherworldly. I mean, he's already old and crusty to begin with, which kind of makes the whole thing that much more entertaining. But there were periods where I looked at him during this match, and I kid you not, I could not tell for the life of me if he was attempting to contemplate what was happening on screen, or if he was just so mesmerized by the idiocy happening in front of his eyes, he was just spellbound and speechless. For me, it was nothing out of the ordinary. I mean, it was every garbage match I've ever seen Jon Moxley have. Fake chops, looks like shit, as I always do when I'm watching the oil mechanic do it. And it's not even like there's a lead up to the chops. It's the same thing every time. They just ring the bell, and they go right at the chops with no build-up. Of course, following that, we got the fake forearms. You know, those went on for a good minute and a half. They look just as fake and phony as the chops do. Meanwhile, the announcers are so useless on commentary, Taz and Shivani begin arguing about the pronunciation of Stephon Smith's name. Because they obviously don't give a fuck. And why would they? I can't remember how long it was into the match when the thought finally occurred to me. And I haven't said it aloud to my dad. I said, do you notice how nobody ever grabs a hold or does any form of actual wrestling in these kinds of matches? It's all just fake forearms and fake chops and meaningless spots where guys get dropped on their heads and shoulders. He was also observant of that. Eddie Kingston just randomly came out at one point with theme music to... Well, I don't know. At first, I thought he was coming down to run off Claudio and Flatwheel. Why did he wait until the commercial break to come out? No idea. And it's not even like Claudio and Flatwheel were doing anything mischievous behind the ref's back. At one point, Ishii was selling on the floor. Claudio and Flatwheel were in the general vicinity of him. They were just kind of hovering about, but it's not like they were getting involved in any way. So I have no idea what prompted Kingston to come out. Also, he could literally just stand there on the floor for the rest of the match and be a non-factor. So, of course, they come back from break. They're doing more stuff. Mox is bleeding again for literally no reason. I don't even know how. And the announcers never bother drawing attention to it. I mean, it's just second nature to them at this point. Water is wet, grass is green, the sky is blue, and Jon Moxley bleeds in random TV matches for literally no reason. Opening TV matches, I should add. There were some other throwaway bullet points that I jotted down here that aren't even really worth harping on. Fake elbows to Ishii's chest. Still looks like garbage. I'm yet to figure out why Claudio and Kingston are mad at each other. Still unexplained. And Lord knows the commentators are ever going to bother talking about it. And by the time we get to the last few minutes, no sells begin with both guys springing back to their feet after one guy drops the other on their head and shoulders. More fake sloppy looking headbutts. Mox hits Ishii with a diamond cutter. Then Ishii immediately springs back to his feet and hits Mox with a clothesline. What the fuck was that? I wrote. And finally, Moxley hits the curb stomp and wins with the Death Rider. My notes conclude with the following. Holy shit, this was rotten. 15 minutes of this wretched television. And while I'm already numb to this outlaw-based garbage wrestling, I can confirm 100%. My father was already over this show after quarter one. Luckily, I was able to convince him to stick around for the next segment because I told him straight up, if there's one guy that you need to go out of your way to watch on this show, it's MJF. And like I said at the top of the review, we didn't get much of him this week, but for the 2 minutes or whatever he was on camera, he still ended up being the sole highlight of the show, hands down. So MJF and Adam Cole are hanging out in the parking lot with Renee Paquette. Somehow MJF and Cole managed to meet up at the same time in completely separate cars. I'm not really sure how that happens, unless we chalk it up to oddly convenient timing. But, well, as we found out last week, Adam Cole and MJF were randomly drawn to be tag partners in a blind eliminator tournament that they're currently doing. They had a match on TV 2 weeks ago, which was set up from the week prior, where they basically went out there and shot on each other and called one another every derogatory term in the book. So now here we are 3 weeks after the fact, and in typical Tony Khan booking logic, now these guys are perfectly content being in the same room together. MJF's pretending to be all chummy with Cole. Cole, for whatever reason, is playing along with it. They're not really mad. I mean, the whole thing's fucking stupid. It makes no sense. But you know what? When I saw this little exchange going on here, got to admit, I was so entertained by MJF's performance here, my dad included. I just said to myself, you know what? Fuck it. I give up. At this point, They've already botched any interest I could possibly have in the MJF Adam Cole feud. So I'm just going to run with the idiotic storyline. MJF's telling him that since Cole doesn't have an iceberg's chance in hell of beating him for the world's title, this makeshift team that they're doing is the best thing for his career. And MJF even went out of his way to have custom merch made for their team. It is a t-shirt that reads, "Better than you, baby." Now available at Shop AEW. Just going all in with the fourth wall breaking and smiling directly at the camera like a snake oil salesman. And like I said, if you completely ignore that none of this makes any sense, and no matter how they go about evidently breaking up this team down the road, both guys are going to come out of it looking like fucking dolts. If you ignore any sense of rational thought and coherency, it's a pretty damn great segment. MJF's the man. He's extremely talented at everything he does. And, I'm now convinced that he's completely given up trying, and now he's just trying to make a mockery of this whole situation. My instincts are telling me that even MJF knows how dumb this storyline is. Now I think he's just out there trying to overcompensate and bring some entertainment value to it. So far, he's not doing a bad job. But, now there was another point here that I failed to mention. Oh, that's right. MJF wanted to hang out with Cole in the city and, I don't know, I guess pick his brain. Try to figure out their chemistry together as a team. And I can only hope coming out of this that we get multiple vignettes of Adam Cole and MJF hitting it off in the bar and becoming really close friends. Because that's about the only way they can save this debacle at this point. From there, the show basically fell off the rails until the next MJF pre-tape. Here's everything I wrote down about the next segment. Renee, BCC, and Kingston are arguing in the back. Mox and Kingston are mad. Kingston still hates Claudio. I don't know why any of this is happening. Lots of screaming and loud noises. Renee is mad at her husband for some reason. I don't care. And I guess Mox is sleeping on the couch. And then we come to the moment of truth. The ultimate shit test to see if we can actively run off my dad out of the room as quickly as possible. Somehow, some way, he managed to sit through this next match. I don't know how. Quite frankly, I don't know why. But if the company mascot, El Hijo del Vikingo, and Keith Lee versus the Jericho Jagoff Jobbers is not the ultimate testament to the fans' loyalty to this fucking product, dude, I don't know what else is. Let me repeat this match. I just want you to all conceptualize this. It is a 6-man tag. Orange Cassidy, El Hijo del Vikingo, and Keith Lee versus Danny Garcia, Daddy Mac Daddy, and Angelo Parker. My first note reads, who booked this match and why? And actually on second thought, never mind, I already know who booked it. The why part, I'll have to get back to you on. Excalibur referred to Cassidy, Vikingo, and Keith as, quote, an unpredictable trio. That's one way of looking at it. I call it a Mark Booker's wet dream. And by the way, the setup for this match, it's about as uncreative as you can imagine. I'm not making this up. Keith and Cassidy are just standing in the back doing an interview. Somehow the Jericho guys were brought up into the conversation. I have no idea how, but Cassidy asked Keith if he wanted to partner with him. I believe Keith's exact quote was, I've got nothing else going on. So sure, why not? And then after realizing that he needed a third partner, because, Cassidy's a fucking idiot. He then turns over his shoulder, and who should be sitting there in a chair but El Hijo del Vikingo? And Cassidy gave him the thumbs up. Vikingo gave him the thumbs up. That is how this match came together. The amount of forethought that went into booking this match was about the same amount of thought I put into taking a shit. And whereas normally, this would be the point in the program where I would fast forward, if I were watching on delay, I was sort of handcuffed into watching this unless I decided to leave the room. Since we were in a hotel, I didn't have many alternative places to go, unless I just wanted to go dive off the 4th floor balcony into the vestibule area. And I probably would have gotten more enjoyment out of doing that than watching this fucking match, looking back. I already named the parties involved. So, just imagine what that looked like, putting all 6 of these guys together in the ring at the same time. Using the term Styles Clash is probably being too lenient. I was actually shocked that the mascot kept the bullshit tomfoolery to a bare minimum this week. I mean, we got the hands in the pocket spot, but when we went an entire 15 minutes, or however long this match went, with no shin kicks, I was floored. My dad didn't even get the full picture of this guy's play act. He only got 50% of it. And the guy's still rotten. There was a horrible miscue in the first few minutes where Matty Mini Dick Menard and Angelo Puffcake Parker completely fucked up a running charge spot in the corner to Cassidy. I mean, this all came after they were jacking off with comedy spots involving Parker's comb. I had already determined by that point, this was the worst match I've ever seen in my life. The only guy in this match I wanted to see was Keith Lee. So, of course, we got him toward the end. And his comeback for the babyfaces was not even that good. And by the time things broke down toward the end, this basically went from a negative 3-star match to about a negative 9.5. Vikingo did a somersault plancha onto the floor at one point. I have no idea who he was aiming at, because the only guy out there to catch him was Keith Lee, his own partner. And I think Keith was supposed to catch him. I'm not entirely sure, because both guys just basically fell down in a heap with Keith shouting, and I quote, "Shit!" That was comedy. And a few seconds later, I guess as a way to cover up for that obvious botch, Keith then proceeds to pick up Vikingo in a pile driver position, and he begins swinging him around like a long dart, knocking out both members of the JAS. This also looked idiotic and phony. And as the match continued to fall apart, everybody just kind of started doing random shit back and forth with no real form of cohesion. Finally, the finish sees Keith holding Matt Minidick in a fireman's carry. And he's holding him there. And he's holding him there. Time passes. And finally, he just plants him with a big bang and pins him. Did someone miss a cue again? Why was Keith looking around like one of the heels was supposed to cut him off? I do not have answers to these questions. My only inclination is these guys are green and have no clue how to construct a logical professional wrestling match on TV without making themselves look like jackasses. Match was rotten. Keith Lee has totally given up. At least he finally shaved that god-awful gray beard. He immediately looks 15 years younger. Oh, and speaking of Keith Lee, while it's on my mind, let me rant about this for a minute or two. So as you may know, they're doing a blind eliminator tag tournament, and apparently Keith Lee is going to be part of said tournament. So of course, naturally, who's his partner? Swerve, Strickland. Swerve, Strickland, 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 Swerve, Strickland Stop right there. First off, how is that even remotely possible? You're telling me that out of a roster of 300-something fucking guys, you're telling me you pulled 2 random names out of a bingo spinner and they just happened to be the names of the 2 guys that used to be a tag team, but then broke up because one guy turned on the other? There's something called suspension of disbelief. And then there's just outright insulting my intelligence to the point where I call bullshit. And when I saw that graphic flash up that Swerve Strickland and Keith Lee were going to be tag partners in a blind eliminator tournament with random drawings, I immediately said, bullshit. The mathematical probability that you draw 2 random names and those names happen to be 2 guys that, oddly enough, much like Adam Cole and MJF, also hate each other. What is that? Less than 0.05%? And on that subject, let me follow that up with a perfectly valid question. Okay. So the winners of this blind eliminator tournament apparently are going to get a tag title shot out of it, correct? I think that's what they established. Why the fuck would Keith or Swerve care? Let me remind you, again, they broke up. They hate each other. Why in the fuck would Keith Lee or Swerve Strickland want to become #1 contenders for the tag team championships when they have no vested interest in becoming a tag team again? Moreover, did we ever get a blow-off to that feud? Did those guys ever have one match? When in the hell did those guys even split up? That was months ago, right? To this day, I don't ever recall seeing those guys have a match together. They split up as a team. It was never mentioned on television again. Swerve joined the Mogul Embassy, or whatever that group's called, with Brian Cage, Prince Nana, and the other 2 big job guys whose names I can never remember. Keith's been on the federal witness protection list for months now. He's barely even on television. So, of course, none of this makes a goddamn bit of sense. Tony has no idea what he's doing. But I guess this was my punishment for not having subjected myself to a company mascot match in God knows how long. They proceed to give me one of the worst television matches I've seen all year. Probably until the next time I decide to watch an Orange Cassidy match. Hopefully never again. But this one in particular, utter trash. Speaking of utter trash, the Job Order are mad at the Elite. Specifically, they're upset with Hangman Adam Page because he did not hang out with them. Now they want to accept an open challenge against the Bucks and Page. A segment that was written by 5-year-olds for 5-year-olds. My God. Is there anybody more uncool than these fucking sissy-ass children? Don't answer that. Oh, and by the way, this segment, this was the one that my dad scoffed at and walked out of the room. I just want to point that out for the record. He survived that abortion of a 6-man tag with the company mascot, but all it took was seeing 6 outlaw goofballs on camera for 1 minute. That was enough to send him out of the room. And I couldn't even muster up the wherewithal to ask him to come back into the room to watch the match later. Just figured it'd be best for his overall well-being. Maybe he might live a few years longer. Turns out I was right. He didn't miss much. After that, I think that was where we got Chris Jericho and Sammy Guevara doing a promo in the back. I didn't get much out of it. The only thing I remember was Jericho saying that he was in the ring with Sting for the first time ever, just 4 days prior. Unless I have dementia and already forgot shit that happened, I don't know, less than 7 days ago, didn't Sting and Jericho have a face-off on the Collision show before the Forbidden Door pay-per-view? Or did I just dream that segment happened? Maybe I just misheard the promo. I mean, I'm not going to go out of my way to rewatch it again. Lord knows I consciously go out of my way to watch Chris Jericho segments anyway. I wish I could have somehow consciously tuned out this Job Order versus Elite Open Challenge match. Good Lord. It's almost like I wanted to watch it in another dimension. A dimension where neither of these teams ever existed, and it was just false advertising. But no, it wasn't false advertising. This was a thing that actually happened on live cable television. Better known as recess dismissal for the play children. It is impossible to believe this segment did not run off viewers. Whichever ones were still lingering about at this point. One of the first questions I asked here, who's babyface and heel? I still couldn't figure it out by the time this segment was over. I mean, the match was nothing out of the ordinary from what you come to expect with a Bucks match. I'm beating a dead horse by even acknowledging the stupidity at this point. And the Beta Bucks were randomly showing dissension with Adam Page for not wanting to fight the Job Order. Teasing splits after a trios record of 1-0, by the way. Sounds about right. Still unexplained as to why the Bucks are fine beating up the Job Order, but Page for whatever reason is not. Aren't they all supposed to be friends? Or was that story only explained on Being the Elite, like 8 months ago, and we'd have no other way of knowing? I wrote down, everybody in this company has officially killed the pile driver. On this show, we have now had 3 matches in a row where the pile drivers were just spots. Just random moves that happen in the middle of the match for no reason. The pile driver. Wrestling sucks. My notes are all over the place for this match. I was so disinterested. I did note that Page all of a sudden randomly fires up on the Job Order. So much for him being hesitant to fight his friends. I guess I would have been toward the end of the match because for like 80% of it, Page just kept refusing to get physical with anybody. Because apparently his gimmick is that he's still a pussy. Everybody's doing random spots. Tags. What are those? I did also note, why are the Elite struggling to beat 3 underneath simpletons and never win matches and mean absolutely nothing to the overall bottom line of this company? Other than the fact that they're friends with the EVPs? I'm just asking. Don't give me a hard time. Finally, the match ended with Page pinning John Silver with the buckshot. And then, surprise, surprise, guess who came out to join the party? The BCC attacked the Elite after the bell. At that point, I gave up trying to pay attention. People bled. There was a screwdriver involved. Somebody got dropped headfirst on a folding chair. I think that was one of the Beta Bucks. Kingston got laid out like a geek and left for dead. And at the very end, the Valvoline associate got on the mic and said that the BCC want the Elite inside War Games. Oops, I mean blood and guts. And unfortunately, they did not have William Regal this year to make the announcement. So it fell flatter than a plate full of piss. This segment also sucked a cock. At which point, we get the next pre-tape involving all guys that are part of the Owen Hart Foundation tournament. I noted everybody involved here are bigger stars than everybody that was on Dynamite this week combined. And by that, I mostly mean they sound, perform, and look like professional wrestlers. Unlike everybody I just saw in that previous six-man tag where everybody just makes wrestling look fake and stupid. So thank God the majority of this stuff is happening on Collision. And then after that, we had more MJF and Adam Cole in the parking lot. This is the point where MJF was getting a little impatient and wanted to hit the road with Cole so they could go party. Cole and Roddy were just having a conversation about something. I really wasn't paying attention. That is where I noted Cole is visibly tinier than Roderick Strong. And it's not even close. And then Cole hopped into the back of the car with Max. Max yelled something equivalent to what a college frat boy would yell after a couple beers. And then they left. I don't know where the hell they were going off to. Getting away from this fucking dump of a wrestling show, that's for damn sure. My dad also came back in the room for this. He was equally entertained by MJF's performance. Kind of amazing how that works. MJF, the only guy on this show that immediately got over with my dad after one segment. And the Elite actively run him out of the room. It's almost as if one of those guys is actually talented and the other guys are the drizzling shits and ratings death. But what do I know? I've never analyzed the numbers. Give me a break. Moving along, though, because there's more to come. Christ almighty, I can't believe I'm spending this much time talking about this garbage program. Here comes Jungle Boy for a promo. And if you recall at the pay-per-view, Jungle Boy turned heel on Hook and left him for dead while his dad was sitting approximately 100 feet away from ringside when it happened. Didn't lift a finger to help him. But, well, now we get to hear Jungle Jackass's rationalization. Why did he turn on Hook? And more importantly, the moment of truth for Jack Perry's career. Will he finally show some friggin' personality? Well, the answer is kinda, sorta. He was still kinda boring, dry, and uninteresting. Even as a heel, the dude still sounds fake as fuck on the mic. Unbelievable. Moreover, though, maybe this wasn't fair for me to judge the promo because I kept getting distracted while he was talking. I don't know if anybody else picked up on this, but the entire time he's talking, I can't stop laughing at the hilarity of him saying a few lines and then pausing his promo so he can quickly turn his head to the crowd. He did it like after every line. He says something, and then he stops, and he turns his head to the left. And then he says some more stuff, and then he turns his head to the left again. And I was trying to figure out, what the hell is this guy looking at? Who is he looking at? Is there a purpose for him doing this? To the best of my knowledge, I couldn't figure out what was going on. It's not like the crowd was reacting. Most of them were just sitting on their hands or nonchalantly doing the droning boos. For the record, his explanation for turning on Hook was, I didn't turn on anyone. You people turned on me. So in other words, every WWE explanation for random heel turns in the last 20 years. Wow. But Tony thinks this shit through well in advance, folks. Always remember that. Maybe it'll grow on me. I don't know. I wasn't impressed with the promo. I don't really think they're getting a lot of mileage out of Jungle Boy wanting to chase after Hook's FTW title? Mind you, a belt that is not officially recognized by the company and has not been defended on this program in months? Why would he even give a shit about that belt? It's about as worthless as the dirt I scrape off the bottom of my shoe. Oh my God. So this segment didn't do a whole lot for me. Nor did the next match. Ruby No-Go versus Alexia Nicole. Now, they addressed why this match was happening. They said this was a substitution due to a last-minute Britt Baker illness. I guess she got sick and couldn't make the show. She was originally scheduled to wrestle Ruby in the first round of the Women's Owen Hart tournament. Completely forgot about that. That match is now going to be apparently happening next week, I think. So instead, we got this match this week. And, I mean, truthfully, there's not a whole lot to say about it. Ruby just beat the teetotal titty fuck out of this chick. I don't know who this girl was or where she came from, but based on the way Ruby was beating her up, looked like she may have owed Ruby some trans. Ruby dropped this girl right in the back of her head multiple times with the Saito suplex. And finally, Ruby pulled out a black glove and used it to win with the lockjaw. At which point, my following notes read, Ruby proceeds to cut a long-winded heat promo on Britt that nobody cared about or reacted to. I would go into more detail, but I don't think much else needs to be stated, honestly. This is probably the most amount of girls wrestling I've watched in AEW in a long time. It doesn't look like I'm missing out on much. Soraya's just kind of another gal on the roster. Tony, the women's world champion, mind you. Just a total afterthought. And meanwhile, Thunder Rosa, just kind of hanging on the periphery, collecting a paycheck. Can't get her back on TV, but boy howdy, we'll keep cramming the fucking Outcast down people's throats like they matter. Anyway. So here's an interesting bit of information. John Morrison apparently made his TV debut. On which show? Rampage. And now his first official TV match will be happening on Rampage. Seriously, can Tony do anything right? And did I hear correctly that he is now feuding with Matt Hardy? Good God in heaven. I mean, I saw QT Marshall there with him. That was enough for me to be completely disinterested. Nobody feuds with QT in this company and comes out better for having worked with him. Just ask Cody if you don't believe me. But finally, we come to the main event. And what a main event it was. Sting and Darby Allin versus Sammy Guevara and Chris Jericho. Apparently what somehow became a Tornado Rules Anything Goes match. Why? Why not? At this point in the show, I had so mentally checked out. I had completely forgotten these guys just wrestled a few days prior in the Forbidden Door pay-per-view. Sting versus Jericho. For the first time ever, wrestling each other on pay-per-view. Not only did I boycott the match because of the other juggernauts involved, but I had such little interest in the idea of that match ever happening, period. Just because I'm so over Jericho at this point. And honestly, I never thought I would say this. I'm kind of over Sting. Certainly by the end of this fucking fiasco, I was. Of course, Tony Schiavone spoiling the ring intros for Sting by introducing him via headset before Justin Roberts. That's always classic. Why even bother with the ring announcers? At least Tony's enthusiastic about seeing Sting. Not since the dying days of WCW have I ever seen Sting less facially motivated. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. In this case, Sting's face is a picture that reads 6 words. I don't want to be here. I had to count that on my fingers just to be sure. Also important to note here, this is not just Chris Jericho. It's the Painmaker Chris Jericho. Which means it's Chris Jericho with some eye paint on. I know what you're asking. Why did he randomly decide to dress up like the Painmaker? I don't know. I have no idea. He just woke up on Wednesday and said, I feel like painting my face up tonight on Dynamite. So it's not going to be regular Chris Jericho in this anything goes street fight. It's going to be the Painmaker Chris Jericho. Riveting television. And a thought hit me while I was watching this. I'm watching these 4 guys out there. It's the TV main event on Dynamite. You got Sting involved. Lord knows how much he has left in the tank at this point. I mean, physically speaking, he's probably only got about a handful of matches left in him. Arguably, it should always be a big deal to see Sting wrestle. And here was my thought. I'm actually curious as to how many blown opportunities they've had at actually putting Sting in meaningful matches that would feasibly draw this company money. Here, on Dynamite in June of 2023, what do they have Sting doing? Garbage TV matches with Chris Jericho. Probably won't ever get to see Sting versus Punk, or Sting versus MJF, or even Sting versus a Bryan Danielson. Matches that might actually draw some money. Matches that actually have some star power. But by God, we'll book Sting in a hollow, meaningless Falls Count Anywhere tag match in the middle of a meaningless episode of Dynamite, where everyone's going to go through furniture and do a bunch of garbage spots left and right. Speaking of going through furniture, and honestly, I was planning on building up to this, but this is really the only thing I want to spend time talking about in this match because I just got so pissed and uptight about everything else that was happening here. Honestly, the whole match was a complete waste of time, but let's just talk about the only thing that mattered. The table spot with Sting. The layers of stupidity to this spot were so numerous. I don't even really know where to start. Allow for me to try and explain what the hell even happened here. Because clearly, whatever the hell the initial plan was for this, it did not come together properly. Okay, try to imagine this layout. You got Sammy Guevara out on the floor, and he's on top of 2 breakaway tables. Meanwhile, in the ring, Darby is setting up a ladder, and it's relatively close to the ropes. I'm guessing that he was going to tease that he was going to do some big dive or maybe even do that stupid coffin drop spot. Nothing out of the ordinary you would come to expect from Darby. He does stupid shit like this all the time. But he begins climbing. And who should meet him on the other side of the ladder but Sting? And my first thought upon seeing this is, there's no way. That was my first thought. My second thought was, he's going to die. And my third thought was, and if he does, he has nobody to blame but himself. All of that was just wrapped in a bow inside my mind. So sure enough, it wasn't a rib. Sting delivers a body splash off the ladder through one of the tables on the floor. Thankfully, it was the one that Sammy was on top of. It was supposed to be through both tables, I imagine. But I guess Sting misjudged the distance of the second table. And he proceeded to smack his face off the second table. And at first, I didn't catch the angle Sting was coming from the floor cam. That was the initial shot they showed before the replays. I just thought Sting completely missed the table. But then they showed the overhead view. And then I actually saw what the fuck happened. Sting not only collided with the edge of the second table, but it looked like he snapped his neck. I remind you, in a completely meaningless match on a terrible, forgettable episode of Dynamite, I thought Sting was dead upon impact. It truthfully looked like he snapped his neck on the second table and killed himself. From the looks of it, it appeared that he just split open his bottom lip. I can only chalk it up to an act of God that this man did not die. It's probably a good thing that Steve is a Christian man. Otherwise, there's no telling what fate would have had in store for him. And again, here's the issue. While it's easy enough to sit here and maybe point the blame at guys like Darby and Sammy for possibly coming up with a stupid idea, while it's easy enough to sit here and blame Tony Khan for signing off on it, I really can't even put the sole blame on them. Because knowing Sting, knowing the kinds of stupid things that he's done in AEW since he signed with the company and started working matches, he probably co-signed it. Because he'll gladly take the paycheck with no qualms or arguments. Yes, sir. I'll do a risky, career-threatening dive through a table for a total throwaway TV match. After all, that's what the cool kids are doing these days, right? And I want to be one of them. So sign me up. And of course, me, watching this live for the next 3 minutes, of course, I'm not paying attention to a goddamn thing that's happening in the ring. Because I'm mainly fixated on trying to figure out whether or not Sting is either deceased or being put in an iron lung. Because, of course, you're probably thinking to yourself, wait a minute. That wasn't the finish? No. Of course it wasn't the fucking finish. Did you really think it would be? No. No, you see, they had to get their shit in. There's a 60-plus-year-old man that's lying motionless on the floor right now. He may or may not be moving. We don't really know. I mean, we're keeping the camera off him methodically enough. Because, well, of course, Jericho and Darby, they have to do more shit in the ring. They have to get their spots in. Somehow, Sting came back in for the finish because they already had a pre-plan that Sting was supposed to go over with the Scorpion Deathlock on Jericho. And after all, Can't really do a proper finish like that when the guy that you're trying to put over in the match is immobile and getting carted off to the morgue. So you'll be relieved to learn Sting made it back in just in time for the finish, so he and Jericho could do some sloppy back and forth shit. And finally, Sting tapped out Jericho with the Scorpion. This was awful. I could not believe Sting actually willingly went through with the spot like that. That ladder spot looked scarier than all of those Nitros I used to watch back in the late 90s when he was descending from the rafters on those single braced cables. Because at least I knew even back then, there was a level of security and caution that went into doing stupid stunts like that. There was no way to safely, feasibly execute a spot like this. This was Sting versus gravity. And him just putting faith in the idea that he will not severely hurt himself or even get killed on the landing. Need I remind you, this man is fucking 64 years old. And it's not like they drew one extra dime off of doing a spot like this. This is not going to increase ticket sales or revenue for the next company's pay-per-view. Maybe if you're lucky, it'll get something for the highlight reel for your opening graphics. But was it really worth it? No. There's no benefit for doing this. Other than potentially crippling a legend for a garbage main event that nobody's going to even remember, outside that one stupid stunt. And you know, I can keep making half-hearted jokes about it, but there's no way that I can joke when I say, the day's going to come when one of these dumb indie motherfuckers are going to try something stupid and reckless on TV, and someone's either going to get critically injured or outright die. You might think I'm crazy. You might think I'm blowing this way out of proportion. But you put your body at dangerous enough risk over and over again, especially with the crap I'm seeing these guys do virtually every week, something's going to happen. Especially shit that you have no way of controlling. You might laugh now, but you're not going to be laughing when something actually happens. And who's to blame then? When the network finally pulls the plug on this fucking dumbass program. And Tony Khan looks back wondering, yeah, you know, maybe I should have taken some veteran instinct advice. By that point, it'll be too little too late. So anyway, I'm done with this fucking show. Let's move on to Crockett TV. Brought to you by Barry Switzer. Only the sports fanatics are going to get that one. But you know what everybody else is excited about? The 1987 Great American Bash Tour. We're in the thick of the build now. Dates are coming up relatively soon. The big one obviously is staged for the Omni on July 4th. We now know the date for the first War Games showdown. And, man, the more we draw closer to it, there's a part of me that kind of wants to set aside some time to talk about that match. I mean, it is the first War Games match, and God, it's been a long time since I've actually gone back and seen it. Yeah, maybe I'll throw it in as part of the Friday special. And it's only one match. What's that going to add, like an extra 20 minutes to the podcast? Anyway, last week was sort of a blasé show with not a whole lot going on. This week we did have a big featured match book for the program, and we will talk about that one a little later on. It is Ronnie and Jimmy Garvin versus Ric Flair and Lex Luger, what they are still referring to as the Dream Team. And holy cow, what a match that was. We'll go over logistics a little bit later on. Speaking of the Dream Team, here's Flair to cut a promo. live and in living color. And, beyond the fact that he's ready for the Bash Tour, he's also ready to get down and dirty with the best competition. Ready to step inside War Games and do battle with the most elite level athletes in the world. And he also wants to remind everybody of a life lesson. In the month of July in 1987, Ric Flair will make more money than about 80% of the worldwide population working 8 to 5 Labor Day jobs. Hard-hitting reality, but he was not entirely wrong. Oh, and by the way, Space Mountain is also open for operation through the entirety of the Bash Tour. The ladies were on board with that offer. And we go from all that to the Mod Squad versus El Negro and Alan Martin. Dishing out the 5-tool players, aren't we now? Ladies and gentlemen, we got the best competition coming your way for the 87 American Bash. Now here's a match with Basher and Spiker. We did get a classic David Crockett moment here. First time El Negro tagged in, he nonchalantly goes, "Oh, he's a big one, ain't he?" Word. Couldn't wrestle worth the shit. But yes, in fact, he was a big boy. So this bored the brakes off me. It went about 5 minutes too long, and the Mod Squad won with a body slam elbow drop combo. Already off on great footing with my notes for the squashes, I know. Boring match, guy wins with a finish. Don't worry, the trend doesn't continue. And right before our first commercial pitch, we get what I would like to coin the J.J. Dillon promo where he explained the rules of the War Games match better than any ring announcer in the last 15 years. No joke, that was the entire J.J. promo. He just took a few minutes to explain the rules of the War Games match, how the team advantage will be revealed via coin flip, and that all men will have to fight until one team surrenders or submits. And on top of that, we also have the Dusty Tully match for the TV title on, I believe it's the 18th of July. That is also part of the Bash Tour. A barbed wire match. No way in, no way out. To which my final note reads, Dusty and Tully are going to be doing a lot of gigging and blading for this Bash Tour. Oil mechanic Moxley would be very proud. Coming back from break, we had Arn Anderson killing Dexter Westcott in a quick squash. Westcott still sporting the world's worst ring gear, a urine-colored singlet, boots, and arm pads, with aqua blue trunks. Looked like something Doink the Clown would have been wearing in the mid-90s. This was another match where the announcers quickly ran out of things to talk about the longer it went. So David would have short spurts of phrases like, "Look at him," and "There he goes," and "Oh, he slammed him hard." Meanwhile, I don't think Tony spoke one word the entire match until the finish. And Arn won with a gourd buster after having spent the entire match working over Dexter's arm. But then we finally came to the advertised dream match, Luger and Flair versus the Garvin brothers, or as David referred to the Garvins as, the Smoking Guns. David, please. No. Don't even go there. Now, last week, when we saw Ronnie Garvin wrestle, a man was more or less killed in broad daylight, and then in his post-match promo, he basically vowed a doom and gloom on anybody that decided to sign an open contract with him. So naturally, Flair and Luger decided to sign their death warrant the following week. Now, it's been a while since we've seen Garvin and Flair lock horns, but if you've seen any of their classic matches throughout the years, you would know the kind of chemistry they had in the ring together. If you're a fan of chops, that's like every Flair-Garvin match in the history of mankind. All the stories you've heard over the years with both guys going out there and hitting each other with hard chops, with the layers of skin peeling off their chests after all those spot shows they worked. People aren't kidding. That was a real thing that happened. And that trend carried over into this match as well. Once Ronnie started opening up on Flair's chest with those open hand palm strikes, you could see Flair's chest swell up like a melon. Blood just spewing out of his left pec. Looked sickening. And that was literally less than 5 minutes into the match. Now, of course, the idea for doing this on free TV was to give everybody a little bit of an appetizer for the Bash Tour, which was kickstarting, I believe, that following Wednesday. It was a good pitch. Tune into the 87 Bash Tour so you can see Flair bleed like a faucet and Ronnie Garvin chop the shit out of everybody. Or in the case of some of the stuff Garvin did here, biting people's noses and ripping their eyeballs out. Now, this match got a lot of time. So pretty much from the start all the way through the first commercial, it's all babyfaces in control. Flair's out there bumping around like a pinball. Luger's kind of along for the ride, but I mean, he was getting worked over pretty well early on. The fans are red hot for the action. And they come back from break with the heels in control. They're cutting off Ronnie and working him over for a while. Finally, Ronnie's able to fight back on Flair and get Jimmy in there to start firing and come back. And right when Jimmy's starting to call for the brain buster, the heels are able to isolate him in the corner. There was a horribly botched spot in this match. I have no idea what the fuck they were even attempting. It looked like Jimmy was going for a back body drop on Luger. Maybe Luger was supposed to land on his feet. He did not. He sort of just took a spill over Jimmy and landed right on his ass. And from there, he got totally lost and had no clue what he was supposed to do. So naturally, the veteran Jimmy Garvin just said, all right, let's grab a hold. And that's what they did. And they talked it over for a couple seconds, and they just went back to the match. There were constant in and out tags from both teams. There are definitely periods where the heels are working over the baby faces, but, it's not like a rock and roll match where you got Ricky in there selling for long stretches of time. This one was more just bam, 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 on to the next spot. Short stints with everybody tagging back and forth. And eventually it breaks down with everybody in the ring. During the melee, Flair goes out to the floor and starts stalking Precious around the ring. And it leads to JJ sneaking up from behind and attempting to pick Precious up over his shoulder and carry her off to God knows where. Perhaps Neverland. And this is so epic with the way this was shot. Precious is kicking and fighting. JJ is... the guy was very stout, but he was struggling to keep Precious up there without dropping her. And finally, right as JJ's about to walk off behind the curtain with her, who should come out, literally from out of nowhere, but Dusty and Nikita, just casually kind of hanging out there waiting for JJ apparently. And of course, JJ puts Precious down so Nikita can deliver one knockout punch. And JJ goes down like a rock. And finally, Flair and Luger just randomly decide to attack Scrappy McGowan. They throw him out of the ring. And right as Flair goes up to try and drop the knee on Garvin, with Luger holding him down, here comes Ronnie to press slam Flair off the top. And Jimmy manages to fight back so he can give Flair the brain buster. followed by Ronnie counting the phantom pin. But of course, Scrappy's in there before the commercial to wave off the call. And well, Tony announced it after the break. I believe the ruling was a double disqualification. That was not abundantly clear beforehand. Nor did it really make any sense if you think about it. Flair and Luger blatantly attacked Scrappy McGowan. Why was it a double DQ? Shouldn't the baby faces have gone over? It was a bit odd. And then we came back from break, where a fired up Jimmy Garvin came out to the booth to demand a match with Ric Flair. But not just any old match. He wants a cage match. He knows what kind of sick, perverted freaks the Horsemen are, coming out here on national television and plotting to kidnap his squeeze. So Garvin's not asking. He's demanding that Flair sign on the dotted line and answer his challenge. And he's not leaving the studio today until Jim Crockett makes the match official with a time, date, and place. And I should point out here, classic pro wrestling logic, even though this was a great Garvin promo, even with all the shit that went down in the match prior, Jimmy Garvin still has to go out to the booth with the robe and the gloves. I'm pissed, by golly. But damn it all, I'm not about to go out there and rant unless I got my fancy glittery robe on. And the gloves. Don't forget the gloves. Crucial. And I will say real quick before we move on, despite the wacky Dusty finish in the previous match, it was a hell of a fight. When you see Ron Garvin and Ric Flair in the ring together, it is one of the most remarkable visuals in the world. They were probably two of the most physically intense guys in the entire company at this point. And when you watch them go out there and chop the shit out of each other, I mean, there is a worked element to it for sure. But that contact they were making, that was a shoot. You don't get bloody chests like the one Flair had by grazing a guy with an open hand palm strike. You got to put a lot of force into that guy to create that kind of swelling. I just can't believe those guys would do that stuff to each other. I mean, they laid it in. They did not hold back. I just can't believe Flair would let Garvin do that shit to him. The guy was nuts. I mean, Flair was watching those TV squashes. He knew Ronnie was a very physical athlete. But he's like, yeah, Ron, just come right on and do your thing. I'll feed for you. Bet he regretted it later on. Anyway, we go from that to Ricky Morton versus Freddie Smith. Robert Gibson, conspicuous by his absence. Maybe he had food poisoning, I don't know. Anyway, so after the onslaught we just saw a few minutes prior, this is a moderately tame Ricky Morton squash by comparison. He just hit a few moves and won with the drop kick. Not the double drop kick, just the drop kick. That is all. And then it is directly back into the frying pan with more Horseman material. The Ricky Morton match was just a palate cleanser, apparently. But now JJ and Luger are back to pick up where they left off. A match that could easily be seen as a main event in any major nationwide arena. Now Jimmy Garvin's out there issuing and demanding challenges to the Nature Boy without the consultation of JJ Dillon. Says that if Jim Garvin wants a title match with Flair, they can sit down and hash it out in a boardroom with Jim Crockett overseeing the matters. And as for Luger, he's here to make sure that everybody knows that for 20 minutes, the Horsemen had the Garvin brothers beat. And they're not about to let them get the advantage over them by coming out here and sticking their noses up, pretending like they were the better team. Luger says the Bash Tour begins now. as he proceeds to then rip off his polo shirt, spike it to the ground, and then scream something along the lines of, and I quote, "Ah!"
I'm pissed now.
Told you I was going to get that drop eventually. It's very apropos here. So then we come back for a Dusty promo, which did not involve as much screaming. He was boisterous and passionate, but at least he kept his shirt on. It was a Dusty promo, however, so you kind of know what you're used to getting. If he can keep a coherent thought going for more than 3 seconds without switching to a different topic, I consider that a win. He did jump around a little bit here, but here's basically what I got out of it. Bash Tour coming up, says that everybody's talking about Crockett Promotions, and aside from the War Games match that everybody's been clamoring to see, Tully and JJ also have $100,000 of Dusty's money in their possession, and he will reclaim that money on July 18th. And as for Dark Journey, aka Brown Sugar, his words, not mine, he wants her to know that if he wanted some brown sugar, he can get in his car and drive down to the streets of Atlanta. So in other words, she's a whore, and apparently not a very good one at that. If Dusty would consider a random prostitute in Atlanta over Dark Journey. And the best part here, directly after stating that, he then told her that if she wants a bit of action from a real man, Dusty will have a limo waiting outside the arena in Charlotte. Maybe that's what scared Dark Journey out of the business so quickly. Dusty went on live television and said, "I want to fuck you." And she said, "I'm out." Now, while we speculate, Nikita Koloff wrestled Brody Chase. Here's everything you need to know. They ring the bell. Immediate pitch to commercial. And they come back for approximately 60 seconds, and Nikita won with the sickle. This is even dumber than every commercial pitch we get on Raw and SmackDown, where the guys wrestle for 30 seconds and they immediately go to break. This one didn't even last 5. It was literally bell rings, and they immediately flash up the chyron that says, "We'll be back." I was like, why even bother? I almost prefer they would have cut the commercial in the middle of Nikita's promo afterwards. Because if there's one thing that is more incomprehensible than most of Nikita's broken English promos, it is a broken English Nikita promo when he's completely blown up. First off, I wrote down, how was he blown up? The match went 90 seconds. Secondly, I wrote, I have no idea what the fuck he said, and I was not even going to try to write anything down. So I continue with my detail-oriented note-taking for the next match. Barry Windham versus Gary Phelps. Barry did some stuff and he won with the running lariat. Told you I was detailed. David Crockett did refer to Phelps as a, quote, wet noodle. I have no idea why I found that funny. Maybe it's just because David Crockett said it. I don't think I've ever heard him utter those words before. Caught me off guard. The match was about as lame and uninteresting as Barry's follow-up promo. We already know Barry was a man of few words. At some point you thought Dusty would have just taken that literally and said, in that case, maybe we just don't have Barry do promos because he never has anything to say. But he does always look sweaty. Then after break, we came back for a Tully Blanchard TV title match. He wrestled Hal Moore, the job guy we literally just saw debut 1 week ago. all of a sudden he is next in line for a TV title shot. Not to mention losing his TV debut. But that kind of goes without saying. We all know Tully is a giving man, though. So, I don't know. Maybe he saw some potential in Humpty Dumpty here. Anyway, they wrestled for a bit. Actually, Tully wrestled. Howe just kind of took the beating and rolled around like an egg. I always like the spots where Tully pretends to let the job guys get clean shots on him. So he'll just put his hands behind his back and do the little cat and mouse chase. We did get a great moment here where Howe threw, I think it was 2 stiff shots to Tully's ribs. Not only did Tully no-sell it, but he just looked at him like he was the biggest piece of shit on the earth. And that's when Tully started fucking with the guy a little bit before continuing the onslaught. Eventually he won with a slingshot. And then David Crockett did his best LA Knight impersonation by going, "Yeah, yeah," over and over again. Maybe that's what this program needs. More LA Knight. He needs to come on and do some color. Actually, now that I think about it, how old would LA Knight have been in 1987? He was definitely born, I know that. What year, though? Let's see. I know this is riveting podcasting right now, looking this up. 1982. Because he's 40 now. Probably soon to be 41. So yeah, he would have been 5 in 1987. I think Knight would have made a decent color guy at the ripe age of 5. You kidding me? That guy was breathing his gimmick when he came out of the womb. Rumor has it that his first words were, "Yeah, yeah." But that's only conjecture. Anyway, what the hell were we talking about? Well, the Tully match, but we already covered it. We did have a quick Arn promo where he spent more time adjusting his glasses than actually talking. It's just the regular Horseman dialogue. Greatest group of all time, the most cohesive unit in the business. They'll dominate war games, blah, blah. And Dusty, Nikita, and the Road Warriors are going to soon learn why the Horsemen are an unbreakable bond. No. At least the unit is. The members, not so much. We've had our good share of flip-flops with personnel over the years. I think they jumped the gun with Steve Mongo McMichael, but that's just my personal take on it. So from there, we had Jim Cornette out of the booth with one half of the U.S. tag titles. And now you spend most of the promo burying the Rock and Roll Express, making fun of the fact that Ricky Morton was out here by himself beating some fat buggy arm nobody and having a hard time doing it. Meanwhile, Robert Gibson was nowhere to be seen because he's got a big yellow streak running down the back of his neck. By the way, still never explained where Gibson was. He just wasn't on the show. And well, I can basically sum it up as Cornette being a dick. He pitched to the Midnights eventually afterwards for their match. But I did like how he referenced the fact that, unlike the Rock and Roll Express, the Midnights also come out on television every week and beat up a bunch of losers with no problem. And in fact, they do it so well, they can actively toy around with them and stick their thumbs up their asses. It's that easy. So, we go to the ring for the Midnights match. And they proceed to take Paul Damon and Terry Jones' thumbs and jam them right up their asses. Figuratively speaking. But, it is kind of the standout fact with a lot of Midnights matches. How Bobby and Stan just go out there and fuck around with job guys, but still make the matches 10 times better than they have any right to be. And the only guys on the show that do it to the same level are probably the Horsemen. Mainly Tully. Now Corny's just actually acknowledging it on TV. And there's also his commentary, which is the icing on the cake a lot of the time. He was great here as usual. His best line was right at the beginning when he's saying hi to Tony and David. And he goes, "Tony, good to see you. David, you look like you normally do." I have no idea why I thought that was so funny, but I died. Maybe it was the long dramatic pause before he actually talked about it. You could just envision David standing there with that goofy grin on his face while Corny's running him down. During Corny's fragmentary run on dialogue, where he proceeded to speak nonstop for 85 seconds, I counted, by the way, he randomly name-dropped the Freebirds here, saying that they'll be squaring up against the Midnights on the Bash Tour. And that's when it hit me. Yeah, what the fuck happened to those guys? They just sort of vanished from the show. I knew they weren't around Crockett Promotions for that long, but I figured they would have at least more than 2 squashes. Kind of shows how guys came and went very frequently back in the day. Great stuff, too. As Cornette finishes his long-winded promo, he tells Tony and David to talk amongst themselves for about a minute before he rejoins them and talks their ears off again. And of course, David and Tony breathe a huge collective sigh of relief. Peace and quiet for a full 60 seconds. So the finish was great. Bobby gives one of the jobbers a top rope leg drop, at which point Stan tags in to briefly revive him, and then they pick him up and give him a double flapjack for the 3. Meanwhile, Corny continues to rant all the way through the commercial pitch like somebody had injected him with 10 times the legal dose of cocaine. It is literally like a comedy film come to life. The only thing more obnoxious is that bratty kid in the Looney Tunes cartoon that always says, "I want an Easter egg, I want an Easter egg, I want an Easter egg." Just want to jab a sharp projectile into your eyeball. He's still my favorite. I love Corny. And then coming back from break, Ricky Morton did a quick promo responding to the Midnights. The only thing I noted is that he went through about 15 different occasions where he would cadence at the end of his promo, but then he would just keep talking. And it finally got to a point where he almost sort of echoed Corny's long-winded run-on monologue. I was just thinking, did everyone just have like 80 shots of espresso before this particular taping? Why is everybody so wired up? I mean, it is the Bash Tour, I guess. Adrenaline is high. Higher than Jim Cornette and Ricky Morton were, apparently. Maybe that's why Dusty booked the next match. Just to bring the energy down in the room and lull people off into a deep sleep. The match is Thunderfoot number 2 versus Daryl Dalton. My first note reads, why? My second note reads, really? And my final note reads, well, then again, they did basically have to kill 2 hours. No, this was the quintessential definition of void filler. I know I joke about it here and there. I am convinced they just said, fuck it, we need to fill airtime with something. Which 2 studio jobbers are standing closest to me at this very moment? Thunderfoot, Daryl, you're on. The fans became more increasingly impatient the longer it went. One lady in particular was not fucking having any of this. She loudly and passionately screamed, "Boring!" to the top of her lungs. She was not wrong. Meanwhile, David and Tony were so bored, they began rattling off all the local cities for the Bash Tour. When they finished, the match was still going, and then they just got ominously quiet for a while. Time passed, And finally, Thunderfoot won with the neckbreaker. Ass. That is my remaining thought. I will say no more. Instead, we will go to the next promo with the Mod Squad. Of all guys to follow that fucking match, Biker and Slasher, or whatever the Jeffers brothers' names were, I can never fucking remember, who cares? They literally said nothing. Bash Tour's coming, they want gold, no one gave a shit. And then we came back for the final segment, which thankfully was a little more uplifting than the previous two Death TV segments we just got. It was kind of interesting how much time they devoted to this, but everything I'm about to cover here, it was all one segment. It was almost the full length of a regular studio squash match. Now, we did get 2 minutes of a highlight package at the end. They replayed the Garvin brothers versus Flair Luger match from earlier, so take that into account. But we have JJ and Jim Crockett at the booth, and this is all about revisiting the Jimmy Garvin promo from earlier. He wants the title match with Ric Flair on the Great American Bash Tour. So now JJ is here to negotiate the dealings. Jimmy wanted the cage match in Greensboro, which Jim Crockett mentions is the venue at last year's 86 Bash Tour where Flair actually dropped the belt to Dusty in the cage. So that portion of the contract has been officiated. As for JJ's demands, Garvin's wife, Precious, had been concealing a stolen fur coat that Flair gave her, God, it's been months ago, in exchange for a personal favor, shall we say. And since Precious did not own up to her side of the deal, the Horsemen want the fur coat back. But not only do they want the stolen coat, they also want Precious's services. Moreover, Precious on a pole. No, I'm just joshing. Although they could have stipulated that and it would have basically meant the same thing. And, well, the rationale for this is Jimmy Garvin is so confident that he could beat Ric Flair that he's willing to sacrifice his own wife. There are so many layers of stupidity to this that go way outside the wacky world of pro wrestling. I'm not going to get into them now because literally all you have to do is apply 3 seconds of rational thought to realize, you know, this is kind of a dumb fucking move on Jimmy's part. Why would you do this? I mean, I presume no sexual acts are being required in this conversation. I presume it's just Flair getting to sport around Precious as arm candy for a little bit. But there are so many unsettling things about this stipulation that make you think, how in the world would this ever get signed off on in real life? Well, the answer is it wouldn't. But again, it is wrestling. So, yeah. But it is definitely one of the bigger selling points for the Bash Tour right now. I guess outside the War Games and the Tully Dusty match. I don't hear many people ever talk about the Jimmy Garvin matches with Flair during this period in 87. You know, everybody obviously remembers the Ron Garvin matches because he ends up winning the world title a little bit later on. Jimmy always kind of gets lost in the shuffle of the conversation, though. I'm wondering why that is. Were the matches just unmemorable? Were they ever not captured on film? I don't know. But guess that's all there is to say about that one. And then, like I said, they took the time to air the last few minutes of the tag match from earlier on. You know, just in the case that you already forgot about a match that happened less than an hour ago. The show itself was leaps and bounds better than last week. I will give it that. You know, the Garvins versus Flair and Luger alone is worth a watch if you haven't seen it. The promos were subpar, not horrible. You know, again, everything's obviously geared up to hype in the Bash Tour. You know, they were really good at promoting everything and did everything to sell you on the importance of those dates. You know, I know we're sort of at the tipping point before things kind of drastically go off the rails with the quality of the programming. You know, we're starting to see some of the early cracks seeping in with Dusty's booking. The star power is still there, though, which kind of covers up for all the obvious flaws. But, you know, if you're really paying attention, you can see that foundation breaking up a little bit. And, you know, we're not too far off from the big sale to Turner in '88. And once that all goes down, it is just, it's all downhill. It's all over but the shouting, as the phrase goes. Now then, on to World Class Championship Wrestling. Brought to you by Loud, Sharp, High Frequency Pitches. 1980s audio. What can you do? Aside from watching it on mute. But then, of course, that would be sad because then we could not relive the greatness of the Stella Mae French Jimmy Garvin angle inside the shark cage last week. What will still probably amount to being World Class's moment of 1984, or at least the second best moment. There's Kerry becoming the world champion, and then right behind that, it's Stella Mae French scratching and clawing at Jimmy Garvin inside a 5x5 foot shark cage. Now, of course, if you watched the review last week, and you heard our exciting recap of the second ever World Class penalty box match, it was quite the viewing. I highly encourage you to go out of your way to watch it if you want to have a decent laugh. Mostly a Jimmy Garvin fending for his life inside a shark cage while a 60-year-old woman is trying to claw his eyeballs out. That'll always be entertaining. We also had another highlight package here. Last week there was a good amount of story development that happened, so they replayed some of the footage of the meeting regarding the Freebirds Von Erich stipulation from, I guess it would have been the Texas Stadium event. After meeting with the NWA representative, it was determined that because of the controversy surrounding the illegal Von Erich pinning the legal Freebird, in a match, by the way, where there were basically no rolls and no disqualifications, but we'll ignore that for the sake of argument. In any case, it has been ruled that the next time the Von Erichs and the Freebirds meet in a six-man tag, that match will determine the new six-man champions. And I don't know if I ever mentioned this regarding the angle, but there was a brawl inside the conference room that broke out, and in typical dry Bill Mercer delivery, which is why it was epic, he casually says, "Oh dear, we have a problem." Meanwhile, bodies are flying over tables and cameramen are getting bumped and shoved around left and right. It's a very subtle observation from Bill, but yeah, I would agree with that. A little bit of chaos that broke out there. And of course, there was also the main event, which was, drum roll, yet another Freebird Von Erich brawl. Just like watching Dynamite, where we see nothing but chaos and brawling for the entirety of the 2 hours. You can just layer that in with bad promos and less star power. So that was basically the first 10 minutes of the show, more or less. They usually call them the encore presentations, but, you know, since we already talked about all that on last week's show, I'm not going to bore you with the details again. You can just go watch last week's podcast to catch up. For this week, we begin our actual new footage with an interview at the local Dallas airport. And you got Mark Lorenz there trying to catch up with Gino Hernandez before he flies off to some location that I completely forgot to jot down. I don't really think it matters. What mattered was the promo material and Gino's delivery. Goddamn, he was so awesome. He shows up in a crimson red 1983 Mercedes-Benz 380. And of course, I see these cars occasionally on the road in 2023. You don't really think much of them. You're like, oh, okay, neat convertible, but they're not exactly vintage by today's standards. And then I go back and realize this was 1984, and the car design had been out for one full year. It was a pretty big deal back then, being able to afford a car like that. He even took a pot shot at me personally, saying he could not be seen showing up on location in a Volkswagen. And I was immediately put to shame for being poor. I said, oh man, I still have a Volkswagen Jetta. Gino doing me dirty like that. I should boo Gino for being such a cruel jerk. Making fun of cheaper designed cars just because I don't have the funds to afford luxury vehicles like Gino did in 1984. Who does he think he is? A megastar? Douchebag. Anyway, this wasn't just about the car. He also talked about the Von Erichs and compared them all to single-engine planes. Whereas he has to travel via Learjet to all his airports, because if he doesn't, he ends up getting molested by all the crazy women trying to grab at his luxury suits. And he just doesn't have the time to keep buying new nice clothes all the time. He is a very busy man, as we all know. And aside from the man of the hour, too sweet to be sour line, that they definitely could have sold on a t-shirt back in the day if merchandise was a bigger deal in the 80s, Gino kind of talked about how he's been visiting friends and family in the Berkeley Hills area of Hollywood, and they've all been wondering when he's going to get his hands on the World Heavyweight belt. He's already got the American Heavyweight belt, as well as the Texas Heavyweight belt. Sidetrack for a minute. He does? When the hell did Gino become the Texas Heavyweight Champion? Come to think of it, I've been wondering the same thing about the American Heavyweight title. I still don't think they ever gave us a clear-cut answer. But in any case, he is a belt collector, among many other things. So that'll be next on the agenda. But for now, he's on his way to hang out with rich, significant people. And then right before they threw up the Chiron commercial, we get the cool visual of Gino blowing the kiss to the camera and getting ready to take off in his private jet. And I concluded my notes with the following. If this man would have been around the business for another 10 to 12 years, he could have been a world champion in any major organization he went to. Or at least he would have been given the chance to sniff the main event. God, this guy was so great. Truly underrated. He had it all. He had the working ability, the charisma, the promo, the body. And all it took was one incident in Highland Park, Texas, 2 years later. And that was the end of it. I'm hoping I still have the drive enough to keep doing these reviews for another few years, because the Gino Hernandez story is such a fascinating tale. You know, I've touched on it a little bit here on the channel, but I really have not done a full in-depth analysis of it. And there's a part of me that kind of wants to save that for a little bit later on, because I'm interested to see how they even go about addressing it on television. Kind of like how I'd like to hear them address how Gino is currently the holder of 2 major singles titles in Dallas, and we've never seen him actually win the belts. He just showed up to TV one week and had the American heavyweight title. I was like, oh, that's kind of neat. Maybe a highlight package? Just saying. But coming out of that, we go back to the ring at the Sportatorium for Johnny Mantell versus George Weingroff, with a very weird spelling of Weingroff. Here they spelled it Wengroff, without the I. And, well, I think I've talked about Weingroff's story a little bit on the channel. He had an interesting handicap as a wrestler in the sense that he was legally blind, or I guess the politically correct way to say it now would be visually impaired, because apparently saying blind is highly offensive to the snowflakes. Kind of like how I guess saying deaf is highly offensive. Now I think we have to say hearing impaired. That's sort of the left's way of trying to sound more sympathetic. Let's take a very simple one-syllable word and let's turn it into a five-syllable word that takes longer to pronounce, but still means the same fucking thing regardless. It's probably why I usually tend not to associate with those kind of people. Although that's not the only reason. Anyway, well, Weingroff had the visual handicap here, but, he still basically wrestled like everybody else. I don't really know how that would work. I've always been curious about that. Could he see, like, shadowy movements or, like, silhouettes? I've always wondered. In any case, this was basically a babyface match. Weingroff was a much better worker, but since Mantell was the regional guy, he was going to hold his own in there. Generally, it was a fine enough match. They just did some basic wrestling for a while. Anybody that watches modern wrestling today would probably call it the most boring match of all time. I'll say, if you're not a fan of chin locks, this might not be the match for you. By the time we got down to the last couple minutes, I kind of figured they were going the full 10-minute Broadway, and that's what happened. They usually manage to get the crowd into it by the end once they start breaking out the reversals and the flash pins. By that point, though, we only have like a minute and a half left in the match anyway, so they're not really leaving you with a whole lot. Johnny also had an interview afterwards, which was about as white meat as you can get. He basically did every "I'm so peachy to be here" promo you've ever heard from an underneath babyface. Not that I'm implying that was a bad thing. It was just very generic and interchangeable with every other babyface promo you've ever heard when a guy is saying, "I'm happy to be here." I did like his line, though. He's obviously talking about the George Weingroff handicap. And he said something about how it's not the first time that he's wrestled blind men before. He did some collegiate work during his younger years where he wrestled an entire team of guys that were legally blind. During this exchange, he says, "They're tough men to get a hold on. They may not be able to see you coming, but they can hear you coming. They can smell you coming." And that statement caught me so off guard when I first heard it. I began laughing to myself uncontrollably. Smell, you say? What, is George Weingroff a wild cheetah all of a sudden? Beyond that, blah, blah, happy to be here, blah, blah, sportsmanship, blah, blah, my brother's the booker, blah, blah, I get way too much screen time on the show considering my actual level of skill. Did I just drop the quiet part out loud? Oops. Well, anyway, back to the ring for our second match. Gino Hernandez is back, and he is carrying the American heavyweight title this week. The Texas heavyweight title, I have no idea. That was still absent from the equation. He wrestled John Tatum, another relatively new guy to the Dallas territory. I don't remember much about John Tatum. I've heard the name on and off over the years, and looking at various cards, I've probably seen the name pop up occasionally. I mean, he was a guy that I think mostly worked in the South. I don't know if he branched out anywhere else during his career, but he was just job fodder for Gino here. And you kind of know the drill when it comes to Gino's matches. I don't need to fill you in with the details. Great at selling everything, great with the facials, great at knowing how to work the crowd and get under everybody's skin. Gino spent some time working over Tatum's knee and some holds. And after Tatum tried to fire a comeback, Gino cut him off, tried to lure him in with the fake handshake. But that did not go according to plan. And finally, he ducked the charge, hit Tatum with a couple moves, and then pinned him with a flying elbow. And finally, for our TV main event this week, a.k.a. fuck it, we need something to throw together here, so let's find two guys and put them out there. Kevin Von Erich versus Killer Khan. My first words were groan, and I actually wrote that out. Then I wrote, not their best effort at putting together a weekly TV card. They tried to spice it up with Khan jumping Kevin before the opening bell. This did not help matters any. The match kept going for about another 5 minutes. It got increasingly more painful to watch. Kevin's out there trying to make chicken salad out of chicken dung, for lack of better terms. Overbumping, overselling just about everything. Khan's just kind of doing his regular boring offense. Claw holds, Mongolian chops, screaming high-pitched grunts. The singular highlight of the match was the spot where Khan picked up David Manning and gave him a deliberate military press. What probably amounted to the greatest ref bump of all time. And while Kevin and Khan are in there fighting and brawling, here comes Bronco to finally throw the match out and award it to Kevin via DQ. And it was great with how Killer Khan sold it. Totally aghast to hear that he would be disqualified for physically hurling David Manning across the ring like a sack of potatoes. He was very animated. He said, "What?" This was apparently groundbreaking news to Killer Khan that you cannot simply pick up an official in the air and press slam him over your head in the middle of a sanctioned wrestling match. Perhaps Skandar Akbar had that conversation with him afterwards. At which point, after the match was thrown out, Kevin and Khan continued to brawl until about 80% of the underneath babyfaces cleared out from the locker room to separate them. I believe the brawl went longer than the actual match. Even David Manning was threatening to slap everybody with heavy fines. So, of course, they keep fighting for about another 3 minutes. The crowd was hot for it. But, that was kind of how they went out. This was, more or less about the continuation of elevating Gino. Obviously, he's not new to the Dallas region in '84, but, obviously this is kind of the point where they were reintroducing him to the main event and pushing him off to that direction. They're establishing that he wants to get involved with the Von Erichs, so there's that added wrinkle. And, it's good in some sense, because it'll mean that they can free up more opportunities to separate the Freebirds and the Von Erichs from their never-ending cycle of matches. At least temporarily. Other than that, the show kind of blew a cock outside the Gino stuff. Matches were forgettable. The only real good thing was that airport interview with Gino and Lorenz. But, yeah, if you went out of your way to skip this one, you're not missing much. The main event was a Killer Khan match that went 5 minutes and ended in a DQ. About all you need to know. But, yeah. Sorry about the delay on this one. Just did not have an opportunity to record this on Friday. But I'm going to go ahead and get this one uploaded, and we will resume with the Monday show. That one will be promptly uploaded in time. So, thanks for tuning in, everybody. See you on the flip side. Peace out.